Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the APIS Health Angels workshop for this evening. It's on investing in health, and we're delighted. We've got a really terrific panel to speak to you today. I'm Elizabeth Cross-Nickel. I'm a co-founder of APIS Health Angels with John Seacrest. And we're going to have a quick opportunity for people to do some introductions a little bit later in our session today. If I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight, Kai Calder is an active advisor and investor with 25 years experience helping grow privately held technology companies. He's really collaborated on more than 35 deals across 24 companies and investment funds in sectors ranging from computational biology to point of care diagnostics and drug discovery to healthcare IT. Kai's really served on a lot of for-profit and not-for-profit boards, as well as numerous screening committees and pitch competition panels. He's advised companies working in the areas of medical diagnostics, healthcare consumable, contract medical services, cloud-based image processing, and clean tech AI. Kai's worked internationally in the areas of technology implementation, international sales, and clinical applications. He's also been a presenter at numerous conferences on topics ranging from startup funding to mapping the sensory motor cortex during tumor resection. That's very interesting, and I'm interested to hear more about that. Mr. Calder has earned his master's degree in technology commercialization from the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. Does that mean that you are a Longhorn fan there? Yeah. And his Bachelor of Business from the Western Michigan University's Hayworth College of Business. So delighted to have Mr. Calder join us today as our moderator, and I am going to let Kai introduce our panelists.
Fantastic. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's great to be here. An honor and a pleasure to be hosting this panel discussion. So thank you, everyone, for making it. It's going to be a great panel tonight. You couldn't ask for a better group people to discuss entrepreneurship and early stage investing with. We've got an all-star panel, and we'll jump right into the questions in a minute. But first, I want to introduce you to the panel. Susan Preston is the managing partner of Sea Change Fund, which is an institutional venture fund fostering entrepreneurial growth in the Pacific Northwest through early stage investments. Susan taught in the MBA program at UW and was the Burke Endowed Fellow for Entrepreneurship there. Susan serves as immediate past chair and lead instructor for the Angel Research Institute, which is a global investor and entrepreneur education organization. Susan is a world-recognized expert in angel financing and angel organizations, and is the author of numerous articles, white papers, and books on angel financing. She's a national and international consultant and speaker on economic development, angel and venture financing in more than 20 countries and counting. Susan spent much of her early career in senior management positions in public and private companies, from general counsel to CEO. Susan has held more than 30 board positions with public and privately held corporations and has served on numerous nonprofit boards. She's been profiled in Red Herring Inc., Smart Money, Worth, and other local and national publications, as well as winning numerous awards for her leadership, including Senator Cantwell's Women of Valor Award, which was presented by then Vice President Joe Biden. Ms. Preston received her JD from Seattle University Law School and her BS in microbiology and public health, both with honors at Washington State University. Thank you, Susan, for being here. Caitlin Cameron is a highly accomplished senior executive with 30 years cross-industry experience in the life sciences, biotech, technology, and IT industries. She's well known for building high-performing, successful businesses and organizations, creating value, and maximizing potential in a very short period. Caitlin has built organizations known for employee satisfaction, including being selected for the 100 best places to work in Washington. Caitlin's highly engaged in the Seattle life sciences community and is a board member and past chair of Life Science Washington. She was awarded the Puget Sound Business Journal Life Sciences Executive of the Year Award in 2019, is an active, successful angel investor, has mentored many entrepreneurs and later participated in dozens of due diligence reviews. Caitlin is CEO and chair of the board at Odonexus Medical Technologies, which is Caitlin's sixth successful venture, which has developed the world's first medical device to instantly and accurately diagnose middle ear infections. And Dr. Della Russo, who has 20 plus years of experience in strategy and operations of for and not-for-profit ventures in healthcare and the life sciences. She currently leads partnerships at Flashback Technologies, a startup that has developed ML-powered non-invasive technology that provides early warning of patient deterioration. She's a venture partner at LRV Health, a strategic healthcare venture capital firm based in Boston. Prior to her current work, Dr. Della Russo was a partner at Providence Ventures, which is the strategic venture capital arm of Providence St. Joseph Health, where she led the fund's investment in Omada Health, Lyra Health, and N of One. Prior to Providence, she was the managing director of Wings, a medical technology angel investment group, and the VP of commercialization for Life Science Washington, the state's trade association. She's been an independent grants consultant, program manager, postdoctoral researcher, and business owner. She received her PhD in physiology from the University of Michigan and completed postdoctoral studies at the University of Washington and Children's Hospital, Boston/Harvard Medical School. So welcome everyone, welcome panelists. As I said, this is an all-star panel. You're very fortunate to be here and hear from them. So let me set the stage for what we're going to talk about for the next, let's say 60 minutes. The goal for the session is to discuss some of the key insights that contribute to successful investment and leadership in the life science and healthcare space. For the investors on the call, you'll take away a better understanding of how to screen, choose, and advise companies. For the entrepreneurs, you'll walk away from this workshop better prepared to create, lead, and fundraise for the next great life science or healthcare company. So let's jump right into it. Susan, we're all familiar with VC-funded tech platforms such as Amazon, Facebook, Airbnb, Alibaba, and of course, Zoom. In what ways is funding life science and healthcare companies, whether on the investor side or the entrepreneur side, different from funding software and IT companies?
Sure, thanks, Kai. And thank you for the very gracious introduction that you've provided. That was very kind of you. So on a base level, the investing in any company is the same. You're looking for certain attributes in every company that you venture into. A strong team that's experienced, hopefully they've all worked together someplace before, a market need, a decent size, validation of that market need, competitive advantage, and compelling technology. So those are the baselines that we look for everything. Then when you start looking at life sciences, there are some definitive differences between life sciences or healthcare companies and your software companies. The first is the time to revenue. If you're an early stage investor like we are, you're rarely investing into a company at the time in which it is starting to generate revenues. But with a software company, most of us as investors have an expectation that revenue generation should start relatively soon because of the non-complexities and few regulatory requirements that come with the software. That the exception, of course, being in certain areas, healthcare, life science, and the full package of what we're talking about. So that time to revenue is different. Typically the stage of the company, the total capital needs can be quite different. That needed to revenue, the initial cost to create the product, being a very traditional J curve here, can be quite high at the beginning as the consumption and moving toward profitability. So we want to look at what the actual cost is for those at a point beyond the profitability line. And then the multiples on it. Multiples in, depending on certain software sectors, can be pretty good. Medical device has been fairly strong. Other areas of life science and healthcare are vacillating, but that's pretty normal. In comparison or contrast, consumer goods generally have a low IRR rate of return. So there's some variability there, and you do need to be cognizant of those as you're looking at an investment. And something we always consider is that even if something looks great, if it can't return what our expectation is on our investment, we probably won't proceed forward with it. But that is a very individual choice for all of you as investors. But from the entrepreneur standpoint, that's important for you to understand how do you present yourself to investors as a lucrative, long-term, profitable return for them based on those various factors.
Yeah, interesting. Good points. Thank you. Caitlin, you have anything you want to add to that?
It's interesting. If you think about investing generally, Susan's right. You're looking for a lot of the same core things. You're looking for ultimately the return on your investment. So all of that stuff is the same. But, I kind of joke about comparing investing in healthcare to investing in, say, consumer products to being not just apples to oranges, but like apples to, trucks or something completely different, just not even in the same ballgame. And so it can be a little bit scary for somebody who's not really knowledgeable about this space. It can feel kind of like you're investing in the dark. But the great thing is, it doesn't take very much to come up to speed on the key things you need to know to be really successful in this space. And there's a much higher hit rate, if you will, in this space than there is in consumer products. There's a higher number of companies that tend to succeed and provide good returns to investors than in consumer products and everybody's latest game and so forth. In addition, they tend to have a longer tail, a longer life, if you will. You get a good medical device out into the market, and you've got market share for decades and decades and decades, whereas a game may come and go. And so those are the kinds of things that I think are important to think about. Now, with many of these organizations, and APIS is health, you guys are the perfect example of this. If you're not really familiar with healthcare investing, there's going to be another expert in the room that you can rely on. It doesn't take a lot to bring yourself up to speed, but there are some key things you want to understand about healthcare investing that are different. It's a regulated industry. You got to understand the regulatory aspects. You got to understand adoption. You got to understand who your customer is, because it's not selling to an individual. It's selling to a physician or a healthcare system and so forth. But then the markets are huge. There's such huge opportunity, worldwide opportunity, and there is so much need in this space. There is just so much unmet need. There's opportunities for companies to come in and do really, really well by understanding their market and launching really good products into market. And as a result, there's an opportunity, therefore, for investors to do really well. And oh, by the way, this is one of the very few cases in the world where you get an opportunity to invest, do well on your investment, but also do some good in the world. And that's a really key thing, I think, about investing in life sciences and healthcare.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that. It's interesting about the long tail stickiness. Christiana, what thoughts do you have on investing in health tech?
Sure. Thanks, Kai. And I just wanted to say hello to everybody and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this. It's great to see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in a long time. I great responses from Susan and Caitlin. The only thing I would add is I actually differentiate between life sciences and healthcare because I've kind of been in both of those spaces. When I think of life sciences, I think drugs, devices, diagnostics. That's very simplistic, I understand, but that's kind of the general big buckets there, and largely FDA regulated. Healthcare has grown incredibly, as you probably all understand from what you've seen. Just the pandemic alone. Now you all know about antibodies, and you all know about vaccines and things, which I actually bucket in life sciences, but healthcare generally. I actually think if I think of the two big buckets, it's software and services and combinations of those, where we would even in the middle call that tech-enabled services. And so, whereas in the life sciences, early revenues are unlikely, like Susan said, to that point that you can't go market products until you have FDA clearance, and that takes time and money and a lot of effort up front. In healthcare, depending on what it is, oftentimes, at least in my world, having been an institutional investor, that first institutional investment, we do expect some revenue because it's likely software, services, or a combination. of that. So just understanding who you're selling to and what needs to be developed, and is it FDA regulated or not in the healthcare space versus the life sciences space, where there's a very good chance it is FDA regulated. And just understanding even the difference in that can sometimes be overwhelming and challenging. But to Caitlin's point, there's always somebody in the room who can be helpful, who understands the space, or who can point you in the right direction. So just wanted to make those qualifications.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great. It's a great to differentiate between life science and healthcare. Maybe we can loop back to healthcare. I get some questions about that in a little bit, but Christiana, let's stay with you. You've advised, assisted, and mentored numerous early stage companies, both on the life science side, healthcare side, through your various roles. What would you say are the key characteristics of an investable life science or healthcare company? We're talking about the company here. What attracts an investor to a company? What should investors be looking for? Maybe some of the key things about companies that they're considering investing in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real good question, because I think there's great companies and there's fundable companies, and sometimes those because fundable from an investment perspective, right? Sometimes these things are, I don't want to say the word lifestyle company sometimes can come off as a bad word. It's not. The question is really, should this company take investor money? And, and then even further than the angel realm is, should they take venture capital? Because that changes the future and the outlook and the control of that company. So I'll just set that standard. I think, again, going back to Susan and Caitlin's point about the base cases, right? What are the base qualifications of a good team? An interesting technology that is protectable if IP is the asset. If it's not IP, what is the competitive differentiation of that technology? And is it a unique business model? Is it something that, is it the first to market? Is it the second to market in a market that is actually opening up by somebody who's first to market? If you think of Uber, I don't think was first to market, but was maybe best to market. When I think about the characteristics, it's such a complex industry, both life sciences and healthcare. If I were to stick onto healthcare, I'd say it is, like we said, highly regulated, incredibly complex. And I think that, the things that we're looking for, just like Susan mentioned and Caitlin mentioned, are absolutely critical table stakes. The things that then you want to look for are, does the entrepreneur and or the team understand the space within how they're operating, where they're going, what they're operating? If anybody tells you it's going to be easy, run away. Run away. It's not going to be easy, because it's really, really hard. And I think that you don't necessarily need an entrepreneur or a team who's done 5 companies in healthcare before. That helps. Mm-hmm. I would say things like insatiable curiosity, humility with regard to the complexity, and just that real huge desire to learn, because I think there are so many incredible opportunities, as Caitlin mentioned, but there are lots of roadblocks. And so somebody who knows and understands that this is going to be complicated and difficult, but is super excited about making a difference in the health of people and populations, and is in it for the long haul, I would say, are really, really important characteristics of the team and the people behind it. And, you said when I talked about fundable, I'm talking about team, but I know that others have other inputs to add for sure.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that your comments are extremely well placed. And the one thing I do want to add is that I want all our entrepreneurs on here to be very realistic about what the revenue potential is, what kind of multiple and return can be on your company, because you very likely have a wonderful product and a wonderful company and all that, but it may be something that is, for lack of the better term, what Christiana and we mentioned as a lifestyle. That doesn't mean it isn't investable. It just means that many of the investors out there will not have an interest. So we, for instance, look for a very large return. We don't look for a long-term relationship with our entrepreneur. But that being said, if you use a different legal structure, if you use a LLC, a limited liability company, and people invest into that, and you know you're going to be generating a lot of cash over the long term, you can share the benefits of that cash revenue with your investors for a long time. And so they end up getting a great investment return. You don't have the expectation that you've got to grow this and sell this for $400, $500 million. And you're happy as a clam, and so are they. So be very frank and honest with yourself about what are the realities for your company.
Good points. Caitlin, you look like you got some thoughts on this.
I always do, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's so many things to look at in any company, in every company. There's such strengths and areas to watch out for. But where I always come down to, you know, it's a cliche, but it's true. It's all about the team. It's all about the team. And that doesn't mean you need, as Christiana said, it doesn't mean you need to have somebody who's been doing this over and over and over again. But you do need to have that person have surrounded themselves with the right additional, who's on the team, who are the business advisors, who are the medical advisors, who are the KOLs, what's the whole team, the support infrastructure. You know, a VC friend of mine uses this phrase all the time. He says, you know, a great team with a bad idea is going to outperform a bad team with a great idea every single time. And so one of the things to look for is it's great. It's perfect if you've got somebody who's really experienced, who's done this before. But even with the folks who have less experience, have they surrounded themselves with the right infrastructure and support? You cannot do this alone. You know, you guys know I'm both an entrepreneur and an angel investor, and I've often said that being an angel investor makes me a better entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur makes me a better angel investor, because I see both sides of that coin, and I know what each group is looking for. And when you're out building a company and you're the CEO and you're building it, it's all on your shoulders. You carry the weight of the world and the commitment you made to your investors to succeed. And that's a lonely place to be. It can be. You've got to surround yourself with the right infrastructure. And so as an investor, I look for, has this person thought about their own strengths and weaknesses, and have they brought in other people to fill in? It's okay to have weaknesses. You just find somebody who's smarter than you to put on the team for whatever that area is. Do that early on and do the right support. Another thing I really look for is, I really love companies where the person who is the entrepreneur has lived it and is felt the pain and is solving that pain and understands that pain. What I worry about is I see a lot of folks coming in with a great idea and they're going to solve somebody else's problem. And I've come up with good ideas too, but you know, this one wasn't even my idea, but we started with market research. How much market research have they done? How much time have they spent really understanding the customer in this case, and who's going to buy their product, and what does that individual or organization really need? If you don't start with the customer, you're going to have a product that somebody's going to say, it's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful, but your customer's never going to buy it. And the other thing you got to look at, if they did the market research, and this may be a little bit further down the road, but smart entrepreneurs will be thinking about this early, is pricing. And okay, so I'm going to build this wonderful thing, and I know that everybody's going to love it. It's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and everybody's going to buy it. Well, it's really important to understand what your customer wants, but it's also important to understand what they're willing to pay for it, because what they want and how much they're willing to pay for it are often two very different things. So Susan's point about, you know, what's the revenue stream? What's it going to look like? You really have to understand the customer to be able to put together a business plan, an investable business plan. And you really have to take the time to do that research and understand it well. I can't tell you how many times I've watched entrepreneurs in all areas come up with great ideas and then fail down the road because they didn't spend enough time to really understand the customer first.
Yeah,
I think
those are great. Go ahead.
I was just going to say something to add to that is customer is not always the patient, often
That's right.
the patient, and often not the provider. So there's end users, there's benefactors of the technology, and then there's the payers. And getting those payers, and that payer could be an insurance company, it could be an employer, it could be a health system, it might be a provider, and it might be the patient. There are actually have been a lot of healthcare consumer companies that have come online recently that, you know, I personally was like, well, not going to go very far, but some of them are going pretty far. And it's interesting because they're solving a pain point. Who wants to go to a lab to take a diagnostic test anymore? Right? So things like that are coming around full circle. So I think it's really, really important to understand who is your end user, who's going to benefit from it, who might be, you know, using it or delivering it, and then, but who's going to pay for it is really, really critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the complexities that makes healthcare interesting is if you're going direct to consumer, you know your consumer is. Your consumer is the person who's opening their wallet. In healthcare, it's different. So great points. Caitlin, I want to follow up on something you mentioned earlier about, you know, being in it for the long haul and, you know, commitment to investors. What advice and tips do you have for entrepreneurs who have received funding and to help them be successful over the long haul? And this also applies to investors, because oftentimes investors are advising. Investors are typically further on in their career. They're maybe doing some mentorship. What advice can you give to advisors and entrepreneurs for the long haul beyond getting funded and getting started?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things is you got to plan ahead. If you're going to be in it for the long haul, you need to not just be looking at today and tomorrow and 6 months from now. You really need to have a long-term plan, and you need to be thinking about how far is this funding going to get you? What are you going to do for your next round of funding? Where is that going to come from? You know, you really need to think long and hard about this and be smart with the investors' money. Investors expect to get a return on their investment, but even in the short term, before there's the return, they expect that their dollars will be used to forward the product, to increase the value of the company. And I watch a lot of young entrepreneurs say, oh, I've got some money, I'm going to go set up an office space, and, you know, we'll buy some nice furniture, and we'll this and we'll that. And that's probably not the first place to spend your investors' money. You really need to be thinking about the long steps and where you are today. Where do you get to the next inflection point? What is the next thing? What's the next development point that can make a difference in the value of your company? So you're right here, right now, you've got these great ideas. How do you get from where you are to an inflection point, a key thing that proves forward progress, that's an investor can look at that and say, okay, you delivered from here to here, you delivered, and then you're investable for the next round or the next round and the next round. There's a set of philosophy that says go for big money early. There's a set of philosophy that says do it in steps. It depends on what your company is. And for investors too, you want to look at how's this entrepreneur really thought that through. This is not easy, as Christiana said. And you really need people who understand how to get from point A to point B. But the rewards are tremendous, absolutely tremendous. There's so much need in this space, and there's so much opportunity. It's very rich with opportunity. And as Christiana said, I mean, the pandemic has just put such a spotlight on healthcare in general, life sciences in general. And you're seeing huge amounts of money come into this space, and huge innovation, tremendous innovation. And there's such wonderful ideas that are going to make a big difference in the world. And many of them are incredibly investable and are going to do very, very well if they've done the things that we've been talking about here so far.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, it's important to think down the road. I've seen a lot of what you said firsthand.
Yeah,
it's powerful stuff. Susan, what do you think?
Well, I you know, what Caitlin has said has been absolutely spot on, as always, in doing that. But the advice of looking down the road is absolutely realistic and necessary. It does depend slightly on where you're at. Healthcare, software solutions, sometimes those things can get sold in less than 2 years. So again, it really depends on the product and the market. And sometimes when you're in a particular area like that, where you know you're getting early to revenues, early to the market, you may take a slightly different approach of thinking more about how do you position the company for a maximum return on exit in a sooner time period than later. So I'm not trying to scare every one of the entrepreneurs away on here, but this is tough stuff. You have to weigh about 100 different factors. I mean, think about how hard it is to price your product. That is a really tough exercise to go through, and it can take a long time. You need to understand the competition. You need to understand the value proposition. You need to understand the strength of the market pain out there, and the value of your solution. For instance, I have found a lot of times in sort of that loop between healthcare and life science is products that sell into hospitals, particularly at this time of COVID, unless they will cut the time, like in surgery, or definitively increase the revenue base, you're not going to sell them. And that is one of the things that is very challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs to understand, is the sales cycle. Some of these products is outrageous. And the more you can do to condition the market, the more you can do to better understand the market, you will be far ahead of your competition. You need to understand your market. Absolutely, and plan ahead. And how do you stay connected with that market? How do you understand their needs? And how do you meet them? How do you communicate with them on a regular basis? So lots of different things for you to think about. And of course, all of you will do it just great. I have complete confidence.
Yeah,
let me
point.
Let me pile onto that just a little bit. It's really true. We look for the triumvirate. We call the triumvirate of healthcare, and if you're selling into a hospital system in particular, but any of these large systems and organizations, you're looking for three things. You're looking for improved patient outcome. You're looking for simplify the process and make it easy for the doctor, and you're looking to reduce costs. And if you're really lucky, you can increase revenue stream with a CPT code as well. And if you've got those things, then you're in. If you've got a great idea that's going to cost them money, you're never going to get anywhere. It's not going to happen. They're just not going to adopt it. One of the things to know about this space is that, docs and healthcare systems typically don't adopt new technology, even if it's better patient care, if it's hard or if it's expensive. They just won't do it. So you just need to think ahead, plan ahead. And if you've got those things, then your opportunities are endless, absolutely endless.
Yeah, good point. So when I started my career, you could get by with a product that the surgeon really wanted. I started my career in surgery, and neurosurgeons in particular, and orthopedic spine, they get whatever they want if they liked your product. The hospital would find a way. Yeah, it's changed a lot. It's a business.
It's a business.
Christiane, what have you seen? You've seen a lot of companies through their life cycles. What have you seen really work for entrepreneurs over the long haul?
Yeah, great comments from both Caitlin and Susan. I'll go back to Susan's point about really, really understanding your market, understanding what you're selling into, how long those sales cycles. If I go back to the question about what advice would I give folks, it was like, really well-defined milestones, as Caitlin said, that result in an inflection point in value, realistic about how much time it's going to take. If it's FDA regulated, that's one timeline. If it's selling into a health system, that's a long sales cycle, understanding that, and how much money it's going to take. And then often we say, take the time assumption and the money assumption and double it.
Triple it.
Triple it. And I know we're getting you all really inspired to go out there. But I think I come back to, as Caitlin says, the opportunities are massive. And if you are solving a real problem, there is immense opportunity to make a difference. But I think that is a harder question to answer than maybe what you think, because the layers of that question, what problem are you solving? I mean, sometimes, especially in cities like Seattle, where we have a lot of technology development, perhaps from, great academic institutions, what you sometimes find is technologies looking for a problem to solve, versus starting with the problem. And so I think that's a real important reflection on what you're building, what problem is it going to solve, and then asking the deeper question, it's for who? Who sees the value? What's the value proposition? Who's going to pay for it? What's their return on investment? Like deeper layers of defining that value proposition are really, really critically important as you're going out and trying to sell into healthcare. Life sciences similarly, because you want to know who the customer is going to be. But those are a lot of the things that I think about.
So Christiana, I have the same 2 rule, but I have 3 2s. So you double the revenue, double the time, and double the time, double the money, and half the revenue.
Half the revenue.
And half the revenue. And then you'll be about right. Yeah.
I think that actually probably applies to most companies, not just healthcare. That's every company.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
And if I come back just 1 second to opportunities, like we've said, there's immense opportunity. And I think sometimes what can happen, especially in a healthcare software services, maybe tech-enabled services, is you'll have lots of folks who are super interested, advisors, potentially early investors. And there's always that, well, what about this? And what about this? And it can be really hard to stay focused because you can get blinded by so many different opportunities. So that's why we talk about really well-defined milestones. Not that you won't ever pivot, but you can get very distracted by lots and lots of other opportunities out there. And so I think having just super well-defined plans, where do you want to go? What have you identified as the number one value proposition? And then there's potential upside, of course. So defining that as upside and not your core competency and your core product and your core market target is really important as well.
And wouldn't you, I absolutely agree. What I want to also get people to understand is, when do they pivot? So have these really good plans out there. How do you test it against the market, the lean startup concept? And when do you know you're on the wrong track? Because we know darn well that many, many companies start down the wrong track and need to do that course correction. So I think that's a really tough part of being an entrepreneur, is being able to know when you need to.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
sometimes it's not even a pivot. Sometimes it's an expansion. So, as Christiana mentioned, our technology can do many, many, many things, right? There's this first medical device we're coming out with. There's more medical devices after that. There's things outside of medicine. But it's really important for entrepreneurs to stay focused first. Christiana, we call that chasing butterflies. Oh, look, there's something pretty. And then, and then you're off course. You got to first put your first one out, make it successful, then go do the second one, then go do the third one. But in the initial days, you've got to stay focused and not get distracted. It's really, really important. And that allows you to make better use of the funding that you have. It's good in part of your planning. And as investors kind of looking at this, when we started with this company, it was one. And then as we started developing out the market and saying there's all these other opportunities with the technology, you line them up so that your first one leads to your second one. And that one leads to your third one. And you've got this kind of logical progression, and whatever you're building in your first one then allows for the later ones, but you're not going and being distracted by trying to do that too. It's very easy to get distracted, especially when you're passionate about what you're doing and you want to change the world and make things wonderful. But you got to start first, make your first one successful, then move on.
Yeah.
Everything changes when you have revenue.
Yeah, everything changes when you have revenue. That's the best non-dilutive funding of all.
More options.
And what you might do early on with funding that you might have, Caitlin, and you can either deny or reinforce this, is if there are butterflies, is there IP that you can file, right? Very early on, so that you can get that value, file the IP, and then you can develop it, but not tomorrow, but later. At least then you have the intellectual property that's going to be the value for that.
Oh, that is such a great point. And I want to re-emphasize that 1,000 times, is that your first core patent application is critical. I mean, certainly others to follow as you do improvements, but capturing every opportunity and thought about what could it do is vastly important. And that's where having a good patent attorney or patent agent is essential, who knows your technology, and they almost become a co-inventor with you, because they'll do, well, what about this area? What about that application? What about, you want to put it all in there to get that coverage.
Yeah.
Great. A lot of great advice in there for entrepreneurs. Sorry, Caitlin, you had another thought.
I was just going to say, I talk about being careful with the investors' dollars. You have to, but one of the areas that it's probably worth paying a little more for is a patent attorney, a good patent attorney who can be your partner in developing your moats. Because that's, if you're going to take a company out like this and sell it to a big medical device manufacturer, what they're buying is your intellectual property. So that's an area you really need to focus on. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, great advice for the entrepreneurs and for the investors on the call. I hope you're listening for the flip side. One, what to look for in companies. Do they have all these things? Are they thinking about all these things? Have they made plans for all these things? And then, should you take a board position, guide those younger entrepreneurs and bring these things up at an appropriate time in an appropriate way. So thank you all for some great advice. I want to take a short pause and let the audience know if you have questions, and I'm sure you have a million, which is great. There's a lot to talk about here. Go ahead and put them in the chat. Elizabeth will be monitoring the chat, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. So load up the chat. Also, you can use the chat to talk with each other. If you have thoughts, if you have things you want, resources, this is a great place for the community to come together and help each other out. So load up that chat, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We've got, looks like we still have another roughly hour or so, but I know Elizabeth has some slides she wants to go over, and sounds like there's we want to spend some time, the audience, getting to know each other. So we'll go for a while more here with some excellent discussion. I want to take advantage of all of our expert panelists. Let's jump back into the questions. For the investors, so we'll shift a little bit for the investors. What's one question every investor should be asking? Either, let's say, the first meeting. So you go to a pitch event, you love what the entrepreneur is talking about. You set up a coffee. I guess we don't do those live so much anymore, but you set up a Zoom call. What's one question every investor should ask? And what question should be the same question every entrepreneur should be prepared to answer?
Yeah, so, the question that I always throw out is, it's always good to lead with a nice, big, open question they can go just about anywhere with. And the question I like to use most is, what is your plan for success? What is your plan to succeed? And there's so many different directions they can go with it. You can, a technologist might go deep into the technology. I got this great tool. Or are they going to say, well, I got this great team, or I'm going to, there's so many answers, and there's so much under that answer. Where's the first place that they go? Do they think about, well, I'm going to talk to some more customers? Or do they think about, I've got this cool technology, so it's going to sell itself? What's your plan for success tells you, did they build a plan? Do they have a plan? Do they understand what are the types of things they need to be thinking about now? Do they understand the types of things they need to be thinking about down the road? Have they thought about their customer? Have they thought about how this technology plays? Have they thought about all the things that we've been talking about today, which are just so important? If they come back with, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a person with this skill set and a person with this skill set, and we're going to do this in terms of our planning, that's a pretty good answer. That's a pretty good answer. If they come back with, I've got a cool technology that's going to sell itself, you might want to dig a little deeper into that.
Good point. Yeah. Susan, what do you think?
Well,
what do you like to ask your entrepreneurs when you first meet with them?
Yeah, for me, that is a really tough question, Kai, because I usually have about 900 questions that I want to ask and go into on every level. And I want to see how they tell their story through the financials. And financials are actually really important to me. And I think to many investors. You have to live and breathe your financials. You have to understand the possibilities. You have to understand, what is it going to cost to get to the end? Does this entrepreneur even have an idea of what the total cost is? They're asking for 2 million now to start with, but does that mean they need 50 million to finish it out? Or does it mean they need another 5? Do they even know what that is? Do they understand, as Caitlin was saying, do they understand the roadway to success along the way? and getting to see whether or not they're realistic. They're enthusiastic, they're passionate, but they're also realistic and coachable. And I think one of the other questions that sometimes we forget to make sure we check the box on is, what is the entrepreneur's expectation? What do they want out of this? I have had situations in which we started due diligence and then discover that the entrepreneur says, well, I really don't want, I'm never selling. I'm never selling my company. I'm just want to work at this and do this, and then I'll pass it on to my kids. Ugh. So that's, those are, we really need to know what the entrepreneur wants. As an investor, we should be cognizant of their dreams and their expectation and putting that into perspective, so that if you do make an investment, you come together as a partnership and you go forward as a partnership, each adding their value to the equation. So if I had to have one question, Kai, I guess that would be it. But that's a really tough thing to do.
Yeah, asking for one is not a fair question.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No.
There's so many things you want to know.
Yeah.
Christiana, what do you think? What are some questions that you ask early on to help screen these companies out and spend your time elsewhere, or go deeper with this company?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, as both Caitlin and Susan said. I think a good one is always, who's your customer? Because it is so complex. And the answer tells me, has this entrepreneur really thought about that deeply? Meaning, who is the entity or person that the product is going to be sold to? If somebody is developing software for a provider system and says, well, the customer is the patient, then I know they really haven't thought deeply. So that's kind of an early screen there. And it's not a no, it's just you probably need to go back and think about this a little bit more. I know I'm going more than one. The second layer is what is the value proposition? If they've identified a customer and you have confidence in that, then it's, what is the value proposition to that customer? And then maybe we could take the question in the second meeting.
Right. Yeah.
I always like to understand, if they haven't volunteered, is, what do you know that you don't know? Because nobody knows everything about healthcare. Nobody knows everything about life sciences. And the answers to that often can help you delineate, all right, where is this entrepreneur really strong? What do they admit that they don't know? Because there's so many things, and it might just be policy changes coming down the road, right? Because some of these technologies are at the mercy of the pen, we call it. And a policy change will be like, oh, well, that's not going to work anymore. So even if it's something like that, it's, if they're able to define the areas they're not strong in, or they don't follow as closely, or they don't know, but they're willing to go find the people who can help them, then that, to me, defines somebody who really is thinking deeply about this space that's just super, super complicated.
Yeah. You triggered something for me that is a little bit of a bugaboo for me, is that I would say 30 to 40% of the decks that I get, the entrepreneur fails to give me their go-to-market strategy. And this is not, I'm going to go out and sell it. That's actually not a strategy. That's not a strategy. Are there distributors? What is there are many channels. Which ones are the initial ones? Do you do direct sales first? Many people do, so that you can do concierge. How are you going to go about doing that? Where are your connections? Do you understand who the customer is? Who are you going to talk to? So I would implore many of you as entrepreneurs to make sure you've thought through your go-to-market strategy and you describe it in a level of details that denotes that you've thought about how the market works here. It's very complex.
Good point. Excellent. Let's see, Elizabeth, remind us from our straw poll, what's the makeup of our audience for entrepreneurs and investors?
You're muted.
It has changed as we've been going along here. We've had a few more investors come in, And so I would say it's probably still about 3/4 to 1/4, 3/4 founders or maybe half founders, a quarter in the support and a quarter in the investors. Yeah, more like that.
Okay, great. We're covering the right topics for the bulk of the audience. And again, investors, listen for these things because these are things you can help your entrepreneurs with. Let's see, Elizabeth, do you have queued up, sorry to put you on the spot, do you have queued up a good question we can bring in from the audience? I have more, of course, but maybe we can bring in a good question from the audience.
Well, actually, let's talk about that go-to-market strategy and how it actually changes given one of the sectors. And so your go-to-market strategy as a consumer product sort of may be quite different than your go-to-market strategy in terms of biopharma or a medical device. Are there any suggestions that you might make about how people might think about the different go-to-market strategies? And Susan, you finished with that comment, so I'm going to ask you to start with that.
Sure. The biggest part of developing an effective strategy is knowing your market. And I don't mean knowing that this number of people have this disease condition or anything like that. I mean the guts, the mechanics of the market is how does that product ultimately end up in the hands of the user? And it is generally not a straight line between you as a company, particularly in healthcare and life sciences, between you as a company and that user. So you need to understand who the players are in that. You need to understand where they are in the hierarchy. You need to understand who your competitors are working with. Because one of the really interesting things is that, let's say there are 5 or 6 companies out there right now that are utilizing a product similar, but not nearly as good as yours. And you note that one of those is maybe in 3rd tier position. They may be keenly interested in your product because that can elevate them as well. And so you want to think about it in those contexts. One of the interesting things that I found out in one of the companies that I was an investor in is that many times hospitals don't buy a single product from a single vendor. They buy it in bundles for a particular practice, so that they're looking for products that come through. And that person that bundles it, that supplier, is wanting to have some type of product that differentiates from the others so that it actually pulls the rest of their products along. And so they end up actually making a great deal of sales far beyond your product. But you've got to know those things. You really have to understand how the market works, the mechanics of it.
Thank you. So Christiana, if I was to pick up on that, is one of the questions that you ask the entrepreneurs, what strategics have they been talking to?
It depends on what the technology is. It depends on if a strategic is going to be a potential acquirer or a licensor. I might not ask them, what strategics are you talking to? I might ask, what strategics are in this space that would be interested in your technology? Because a lot of those early conversations might be confidential and they don't want to release that, and that's fine. I don't expect them to say specifically, especially in early meetings, but I think I want them to understand the industry landscape. So what strategics would license, what strategics might sell, what strategics might be interested in acquiring your company or your product or your IP at some point in the future. Caitlin, you're shaking your head.
That's exactly right. No, you're exactly right. And in fact, very early on is probably too early for a young life sciences company to reach out to strategics because there's too much risk of revealing, and they're not going to be interested at that stage. So you have to reach a certain stage, and you really need to have some intellectual property filed first, as we were talking about earlier. There's just a strategic is going to love to listen to your idea and then go build it themselves if you're not careful. So it's just understanding how to negotiate that the pathways here to get to the right thing and to negotiate with a large organization like that. You're a little guy. They're the big guy. You got to be careful. But when you get to the right time and the right place, and particularly if you've done this before and you know what you're doing, talking to strategics can be incredibly powerful. I like your idea, Christian, of, who are the players in this space? Do you know? And what might they do for you? And what might you do for them? Most life sciences companies ultimately get connected up with strategics, but it's later on. It's down the road.
Okay.
If you're able to, if someone is able to mention a specific product line and say, oh, Medtronic has this product line and it's lacking this, but we have this, at least some diligence and work on particular products that they have or acquisitions that they've done recently for, and a lot of information. You don't need to know the details of the M&A transactions, but just especially early, just understanding who plays in this space, who plays against each other, because obviously you want more than one strategic to be interested in your product. And so understanding competing products, competing product lines, things like that, it just helps to know that they've done some work and research around that and have a line of sight to what a potential exit might be or partnership, commercial partnership agreement.
Great points. And for the audience, if you would like, totally optional, as you put questions in the chat box, if you put obviously your name will already be in there. If you put which organization you're with, and you want to be called out, Elizabeth can mention you by name, and we can give you a little visibility here. I got another question here that kind of spins off something we talked about, but it's the flip side. So we've talked a lot about investors screening entrepreneurs and companies. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs to screen their investors, to screen for, because these are going to be long-term partners. What would entrepreneurs want to be looking for in their investors? Let's see, Susan.
Oh, okay.
Great question.
Yeah. I hope they are looking for value beyond the money. That is not always true. And honestly, if an entrepreneur is only looking for money and wants your money and then go away, it's probably not an investment I'm interested in. Not because I think I have some profound knowledge or, guidance or anything like that. I have 22 years of investing and 25 years of being a lawyer. So there's got to be something there that I've got. But all that setting aside, it is a partnership, and you are interested in how they're developing and what their future is holding for them, and how that impacts your investment. So the fact that an entrepreneur would choose not to take that is a telling sign of maybe non-coachability. So I think that those entrepreneurs should look for somebody who can add far more than their money, that have a base of knowledge that is important for them, either experience in starting a company up, experience in the particular field that they are in. So subject matter expertise, they have connections to customers, prospective customers. There's a lot of ways that investors can add value. And so I think that you're looking for that person. And remember, particularly in life science companies, the length of time of the investment is longer than the average marriage. So this is a partnership that you better actually sort of like each other as well, because otherwise it's going to be pretty torturous because there isn't a divorce there. So that's also, make sure that you're compatible, even if just on a professional level. You don't have to, go out to dinner together, but, respect each other and enjoy working together.
Yeah, and Caitlin, I see you nodding your head. I want to come back to you because I've got a twist on that question, but I want to let Christiana jump in here first.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think it was Jolene put a comment in there that said relationships matter. Relationships always matter, but especially in those early stages, because I think it can be really, really difficult to bring in an investor who, you know, not only doesn't add value, but actually can either slow things down or just be a pain in the neck, frankly. And it's not only a pain in the neck to you, but that is a risk for future fundraising. So keep that in mind. I mean, you really want to have somebody who has you and your company's best interest in mind, is going to support you, has those things that Susan mentioned: relationships, connections, subject matter expertise. And even if it's not them, they can bring folks in to help out. That is really important. So not much more to add. It's just to be careful and think hard about it. And that can be hard when you really need to raise money. So it's something to remember.
Yeah, that checkbook looks very enticing when you need the money. Good point about being careful. Caitlin, the twist I want to ask you the same question, but put a little twist on it, and that is, you've raised a lot of money for your companies. What would cause you as an entrepreneur to walk away from an investor? What are some yellow flags, red flags that would cause you to walk away?
I have walked away from money, and I've walked away from money in the early days where the check was large and we really needed it, and just, it's not worth it. It is not worth it. So there's some things, Susan's right. You guys are both right about compatibility is really important. And the truth is that these are partnerships, these are relationships. And, it's been my investor group. It's really interesting because I've become really good personal friends with some of these people. I try to separate and not be, there's business in business, but many of our investors have become very close and they're very important to me. And, that kind of adds also a layer of you never want to disappoint them, right? So you do look for compatibility. You look for somebody who is going to be supportive and helpful, and who also is going to write another check. It's this last round for our company. 100% of this round went to either our current investors or a referral from our current investors. That's huge. If you build the right relationship with your investors, then they continue to support you throughout the life. And for most of us, it's not one round and done. It's you raise a small round, you prove it, you raise a larger round, you prove it, you raise a larger round, you prove it. And so you want to have the support of your investors. And again, knowing what that path is and how much money, to Susan's point earlier, how much money is it going to take? What I walked away from was, number one, people who they think they know more than you, and they're going to tell you everything, and they're going to constantly be, I want advice. I don't want somebody telling me what to do when they don't know my business. And that's one big one that I walked away from. I had a guy telling me that, you need to hire me, and here's all the things I'm going to tell you to do. And it's like, yeah, thank you. Never mind. Sometimes it's a matter of is this the right fit? This person, I walked away from one. I said, I don't think I'm the right company for you, because he was not comfortable in the healthcare space. And he really wanted to be a part of this. And he really saw the incredible value, but he just wasn't comfortable. So what I said was, why don't you go get comfortable first and then come back to me? Because I never want to have an investor who's nervous about the investment that they've made. And that guy 6 months later came back and invested. And he was incredibly knowledgeable. And that turned out really well for both of us. But you want your investors to be partners. You want to be able to. Some of my investors I can call up and bounce things off of. Susan's, a person that you can call up and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. What is your perspective on this? That's really, really helpful. It goes back to that creating that village that I was talking to earlier. You can't do this alone. You need a support infrastructure. One of the pieces of support is your investors.
Yeah.
She doesn't always like the answers I give, but we don't have to agree,
game, right?
Yeah, we can still like each other. We just don't have to agree.
Yeah. Well, Susan, let's stay with you for a sec. What are some mega trends you're seeing in healthcare and life sciences? What are the big glacial tidal shifts that are happening that you think will really influence the next 5-10 years that entrepreneurs and investors can be watching coming down the pike?
You said the next 2 years, I'd have an answer.
Next 2 years, yes.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
but I say,
yeah. No, you didn't say it. Well, vaccines. I mean, and anything to do with software and management of the healthcare system in a more efficient manner. People, in particular investors, are very reactionary to the current market and trends in the market and things that are going on. You'd like them to be very far thinking, but most investors aren't quite that smart. And so they look and see, what is the immediate need? What do we need to do? What are the current trends? And so Healthcare 4.0, a lot of these things, anything where it is Internet of Things, anywhere where we're a connected environment, improving those things, improving the bottom line, are all really, really important. There is always a need out there for the longer term value of certain medical devices, and of course the large mega issues of drug discovery and so forth. But just recognize that the ebbs and flows of the market and what is hot, what's high multiples, has a lot to do with what's going on in the macroeconomic world around us. So it depends. How's that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, great perspectives. Appreciate it. Christiana, what are you seeing out there that's coming?
Yeah, I mean, I'll flip it to kind of what I'm excited about.
Okay.
Given that, I mean, and there are trends, but it's also things that I'm excited about. I think because you could say valuations is a big trend, and that's a little bit nuts right now. So
True. That is true.
Right.
I think one of the things that's really exciting, and it is a trend, is that as if you've looked at healthcare companies that have gotten funded recently and that are making really, really good traction in the healthcare industry, I feel like we haven't turned a page yet, but I think we're starting to turn the corner a little bit in realizing that health is more than physical health. It is behavioral and mental health. It involves social determinants of health, a subsector we call SDOH in healthcare. There's companies that are looking at the zip codes that people are from, because that actually can determine your life expectancy. So what I'm excited about is a lot of these companies are really trying to bring in all these other factors that influence health of populations and trying to figure out how do we do better by not just focusing on, oh, you have this disease, this is a sick care system, so we're going to go after that one symptom and that one disease, and then you're on your way, because it's so much more complex than that. And these are hard challenges to solve. So that gets me very excited. And I think it's still a long way to go before we really can prove that out, because so many of these new companies and technologies are going after self-pay by those who can afford it, or employers who can afford it for their employees. And that's how we have to prove things out first. That's that early go-to-market of like, well, let's sell it to people who can afford it, who have some cash that they can experiment with, like large employers. But then hopefully we will go down the line and we will serve everybody with these types of technologies. The other thing, the trend that I think is a good trend, is that when I first started looking at life sciences and especially healthcare, many companies would come forward and say, it's in the cloud, or it's AI, or it's blockchain. And that really doesn't tell me anything other than that's an enabling technology versus, well, what are you doing with that enabling technology? And I think that entrepreneurs have learned that really well and are not necessarily just getting really excited about that enabling technology. And that's new enough for me to write a check for. It's, what are you doing with it? And why is that the best enabling technology to use to solve the problem that you're trying to solve? So I think that's a good step forward as well. I would call that, maybe digital health 0.5 back in the day.
0.5.
That's great. Yeah, I love it. There's some good forward-looking thoughts and hopefully some great changes to healthcare. Caitlin, what's on your mind? What are you looking to the future for?
Yeah, so I just have to laugh because the other piece of that, Christian, is that it's like it's the thing. Every new company has to have AI as part of their value proposition, right? Everybody comes through and says AI, AI, AI. I was joking for a while that somebody's going to come through with a garbage truck with AI on it. That's going to happen. And then just about fell out of my chair when, in fact, a company came and presented AI for garbage trucks. So I think that AI has tremendous, tremendous potential in healthcare. Absolutely. We have to manage it to manage the downside. But can you just imagine the huge advances that can be made with artificial intelligence? There's just so that move more quickly, have huge databases. Looking at maybe something on the skin, yeah, a doctor can look at that, but I bet that an AI database can do a better job of identifying exactly what's going on and earlier. And I think that AI has tremendous potential across the board. It also has the potential, I'm hopeful, that if we do it right and protect against the downsides, that it's an area where different nations can come together to do good. And it's an area that enables the differences in different countries, enables us to bring those nations that don't have our level of expertise in healthcare and bring them up. And that's some real good in the world as well. I'll just say as an aside, I'm also really, really bullish on ultrasound, which is our device is an ultrasound device. I think ultrasound has tremendous potential. We've invented a technology that is unlike any other. I think ultrasound has untapped potential, and we're going to see a lot more from ultrasound as well. And I'll just add one more thing: more involvement of the patient. That's what I want to see, is more involvement of the patient, and I think we're seeing more of that slowly.
I just had to crack up at John's add to the chat there that says Long Island iced tea microcap adds blockchain to name and stock source.
Right.
Good God.
Love it. So let's see, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and we've been going for over an hour. It feels like we just started. There's so much fantastic information. I do want to be conscious of things that Elizabeth has planned. One last question. We can't finish without shooting out here. For each of you, what's the best way for entrepreneurs, investors, support people to engage with your organization? Caitlin.
You can send me an email. Our website has a contact us. That's easy. Otonexus Medical Technologies. Go there and send a note, and we'll get back to you, or call me or email me.
Great, Susan.
It's really easy. Again, just like Caitlin, we have a website, Sea Change Fund, and there's an info at Sea Change Fund. I am Susan at seachange.fund. So very simple that way.
Thank you. Christiana, what's the best way for people to engage with your organization?
Sure. So I am largely independent right now. I'm an advisor, a consultant, so you can just find me on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. That's the best way.
Yeah, LinkedIn works too, of course. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much.
I have a unique enough name that you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, we're not done yet, so everybody stay put. We've got some Q&A. I know Elizabeth has some fantastic slides to put up. Elizabeth, what have you seen in the chat that's very relevant that we really want to get to?
Well, there's been a number of questions about exits. So part of it is, how do you get involved in investing in the first place? And then how do you get your exit at the end? And so I think we could say, are there differences in exits for the different sectors within the health field? What kinds of exits are you seeing?
Well, yeah, if you talk about healthcare, it's healthcare and life sciences cover such a broad swath. Think about the difference between drugs, for example, which are tend to be very long term, versus some other things that can be very quick turnaround and quick exits. If you think about digital health, that's an entirely different world. Telehealth is an entirely different world. So this kind of umbrella of healthcare and life sciences covers a very, very broad swath, and each one of those areas has a different timeline, has a different path. Our regulatory path is very, very simple. A drug path is longer. but drug money, there's a lot of drug money there. So it's understanding the individual parts, not just looking at life sciences as a whole. So an exit for a company like ours, we're going to sell to a big medical device manufacturer. That's a very standard exit for a medical device. A drug is more likely to have many different exit points. They may develop to a certain point and then sell what's called an asset at that point to a drug company to further develop it. They may develop it all the way to the end, take it to market, or sell it at that point to another. So it's different. Every one of them is different. And that's again where places like this, Apis Angels, if you look around, you're going to have somebody who's an expert in the drug side, an expert in the telehealth side, an expert in the digital health side, an expert in medical device side, whatever it happens to be. The exits infrastructure, again, this gets into the entrepreneur understanding their market and understanding what their exit is a big thing to look at as an investor. It's not just that I want to build this and it's going to be great. Well, then how do I get my money back? You got to ask that question and understand the answer. I look at these verticals this way, but you can also look at it this way, by the way. So take one disease, say diabetes, is going to have all kinds of different steps of tools, of providers, of treatments, et cetera. If you look at it this slice, that's another way to look at the opportunities.
And Dale had asked that question about how do you differentiate life sciences from biotech, from medical? So I'm hoping that, did you have a further question on that, Dale?
No, I was just saying we should have a discussion for the investors that aren't familiar with life sciences to talk a little bit about the differences they see between the business plans for life science versus technology companies.
Yeah, it's a great question, Dale. Let's put that to the panel. For each of you, what are you seeing that's unique to each of these sectors? So that both investors and entrepreneurs should know that's specific to that particular subsector. Christiana, you've seen a lot of different companies in different sectors. You're at Wings, which is a lot of med devices, Life Science Washington. Your current role is looking at a variety of different companies. What are you seeing out there that's very different between the different subsectors?
And just want to clarify, we're not talking about exits right now, right? Are we talking about what we're seeing in those presentations, if you will, or those pitches?
Yeah, more on the entrepreneur side, the early stage side for the entrepreneurs and the investors when they're looking at these companies, looking at starting companies, building companies, and investing in companies.
Yep. I would say, in the life sciences side, and I go back to what I think about life sciences, which is drugs, devices, and diagnostics. I think there's a fairly defined roadmap for those types of companies, especially when they're regulated by the FDA. Not that it's easy, but that there's development, there's FDA clearance, there's if you need to do clinical trials or not. And Caitlin can speak much more to the specifics around that, but it's those companies have been around, those types of development cycles have been around for a while. Selling to strategics is a fairly known type of pathway. As Caitlin said, it's a common way for those types of companies to exit. So those, I think you'll always find people who have been there, done that, who can feed back if you're an investor and you're looking and saying, does this make sense in this type of industry? In healthcare, again, you got to break down that subsector. And are you selling to a health system? Are you selling to provider groups? Are you selling to an insurance company? Are you selling to an employer? The iteration on business models has been, there's been quite a few cycles on that in how companies get paid that are trying to deliver care differently, like things like One Medical, like Zoom Care, things like that, things that are trying to sell to employers because you've got to prove benefits to the employees if you're selling those. So those, I would say, the business models are newer. The exits are probably, I would say, the potential, again, depending, is there's a lot of companies playing in the healthcare space now that you never would have seen before. So Best Buy just bought a company called Current, which is a remote patient monitoring platform. And it's not their first acquisition, but they did slow down for a little bit because I think their head of healthcare left. So You would never think that Best Buy was getting into the healthcare industry. Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, all the big insurance players, Optum and United and all of those companies. I would not look potentially to health systems as being acquirers. Some of them are, but I think that's less common. But I think that the outlook for acquisition for those types of companies is a lot broader. And so it's a little bit harder to tease out, is this the right business model? Because business model innovation has been happening quite a bit on the healthcare side.
That's great. Thank you. Susan, I see you nodding your head. What's on your mind?
I completely agree. And I think the business models, they do have a tendency to shift a bit as the structure particularly in healthcare changes. So you want to be really cognizant of understanding where the buy point is. But I agree with Christiana's categorization of life sciences versus healthcare. I think that's a really good differentiation between those two. Again, the basic difference is who the customer is, who the ultimate buyer is, and that means by which you get to the market. You just have to be really sensitive to that, even within those respective buckets. But what we need out of a successful entrepreneur doesn't matter about the category that you happen to be in. And all those things are still the same.
Caitlin, what have you seen with regard to differences in different subsectors and how they're approached by entrepreneurs and investors?
Well, what Susan said last is probably the most important. What we need from entrepreneurs and what investors want doesn't change, and not just the segments within these areas, but across other consumer products, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think that the most important thing to look for is, does that person have the expertise in that particular area, or have advisors and supporters that have the expertise? And it's just, healthcare is an area where everybody has an opinion. Hey, I went to the doctor and this didn't work for me, so I'm going to invent a doobu to fix that. That isn't the way this works. You really need to understand the market. You need to understand the customers. You need to understand from front to back, or you need to have somebody with you who's a supporter who does. The different areas have different timelines. They have different regulatory paths. They have different customers. They have different ways of exit. And what you really want is just somebody who understands all of that and who really can lay that out. And that's what I was talking about. What's your plan for success and what's your path from start to finish? You need to have thought about that. The entrepreneur needs to have thought about that, and the investor needs to ask whether the entrepreneur's thought about that and really understands how to get from where they are to where they need to be. And in order to do that, you have to understand where you need to be. You have to start with that end in mind. You have to understand the customer. You have to understand what the exit looks like for this particular company.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, fantastic points. It's interesting.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say what again is comforting to hear from entrepreneurs is on the healthcare side, I'm talking, their understanding of the drivers of the changes in the market that are driving the changes in business model, because healthcare it hasn't been stagnant for many years, right? We had the Affordable Care Act, and now we have a lot of value-based care, direct contracting that's happening. There's, I mean, even in certain particular sectors, if you take mental and behavioral health, there was, regulations related to parity of insurance payments. Hasn't happened quite perfectly yet, and it never does. So that's the other caution, is to say, oh, well, this law was passed and then this will happen. It's not always very true, but just understanding policy changes and the drivers. What are the drivers of change in healthcare? Because healthcare is always changing from a regulatory standpoint and a business model standpoint. So again, just knowing that the entrepreneur is on top of that, or has somebody on the team who's on top of it who really understands those drivers, because it can sometimes be a moving target.
Yeah, great points. Great points. Thank you, Dale. It's a great question. Elizabeth, any other burning questions from the audience we should tackle?
I think there's just a little bit of a question about if I'm in this as an early investor, how long am I anticipating that my money is going to be involved? And so we heard that some startups might finish in the first couple of years. Some might take much longer to achieve that. Is there a time frame that fits with one of the different sectors that you could identify as an example?
Yeah, who wants to kick off with that? Susan, you want to get us started?
Yeah, 2 to 3 times as long as you originally thought.
Longer than the entrepreneur tells you.
It always is. I mean, again, the 2Z rule, twice as long, twice as much money, half the revenue. We love entrepreneurial enthusiasm. We love that. We love the optimism, the belief, the dynamic and emphatic belief in what they're doing, because that's what keeps them going and that's what keeps the company going. Mm-hmm. It is partly our responsibility as an investor to go, really? You sure? Yeah, it kind of, maybe we might want to think, have you thought about this? And that's part of what we are there to do, is be the Debbie Downer and try to put some little bit of reality into the twist. So anyway.
The other thing, though, I'd add is that, to the flip side of that, which, you're absolutely right, Susan, is that investors in this space, they get it, right? Mm-hmm. If they've been in it, they get it. They're not necessarily a tech investor or expecting a tech type of exit cycle. So, that's to your benefit to be an investor if you're looking to invest in this space. That if you know the space, that's great. If you don't, get excited about it. Like, learn with the entrepreneur. That's why I'm in healthcare, because I have barely scratched the surface, and I was inside of a healthcare system for 4 years. And there's so much to learn. It's fascinating, and you can really make a big difference. So I think that going for the ride with the entrepreneur will only benefit them. So and it's just, you got to be honest. Entrepreneurs need to be honest with the investors, and the investors need to have a realistic view of this particular space.
Yeah.
Could I ask one last question that's particularly about there are health accelerators that are out there. There are accelerators for all industries, but have you seen a health accelerator that is particularly effective in moving companies along?
J&J Labs, which unfortunately is not here, is one. They've done some amazing things. We're hoping that we can try to pull off getting J&J to put one here. There's a lot of accelerators out there. Mm-hmm. What have you guys seen?
I don't really
I'll jump in and say
enough analysis of the incubators to really make an assessment of their success rate and things like that. Unfortunately, I haven't really looked at it deeply.
One nice thing about COVID is a lot of accelerators have been forced to go online, which has been great for people who don't live in their city. I got to tour the J&J accelerator, and it looks fantastic. Yeah. I'm not in a position, if I were starting a company, to move to Houston, I think it was, the one I looked at. They may have gone remote, but so many have. So that's been a great benefit. And one plug I'll make for Seattle, talking about going back to something we mentioned earlier, is the level of professional resources. There are several top law firms in the area doing intellectual property that can really give you good strategy around creating a patent thicket, and so many experienced attorneys who have worked with startups all the way from beginning to end. It's a great place to do startups.
Yeah, there's the entrepreneurial spirit here, in particular in life sciences, is huge. And not an accelerator, but one of the things entrepreneurs can really take advantage of is Life Science Washington's Institute and their WIN program. There's wonderful resources there for early entrepreneurs to help figure out how to, all the things that we have been talking about. And, you know, Dale, if you're still there, there's the plug. It's really a very worthwhile and it's free. Just contact Life Science Washington, get involved in their WIN program. Wonderful mentors, wonderful support, wonderful training and education. It's a really good tool here. And beyond that, you know, I just love being in Washington, in Seattle area, because it is such a strong life sciences community, and it is such a supportive life sciences community. You go to Boston, those companies hate each other, and they do not cooperate at all. And here, being a part of Life Science Washington, of course, you see this all the time. That I just got off the phone yesterday with the CEO of another ultrasound company, and it's supportive. It's a good community, and I think that helps entrepreneurs succeed, and it helps investors, because you do need that village, you need that infrastructure to succeed.
The only thing I would add about accelerators is that I would advise entrepreneurs to look at the accelerators. Almost, it's not a long-term relationship like an investor relationship, but before you jump in, if you've been accepted to one, like take a look at what are you giving up? What are they going to give you in return? I don't think it's a great idea if you have focused time and they can help you with advice and focus product development and do some of those early turns. But I wouldn't necessarily say that venture investors consider companies that have come out of any particular accelerator as better or not than others. So I wouldn't necessarily say it might give you traction and you have it on a slide, and that's great. It's a little bit of a check the box, but it's more for your own benefit than I think it is as something that you would consider adding a huge amount of value, because, you know, you can do similar things with great advisors or a set, you know, a great group of folks who come to you and, you know, help you turn on product and give you great advice. So I would just, you know, make sure you're not giving up things you don't want to give up by going into an accelerator.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth. How are we doing on time? Should we switch gears to the slide presentation and audience introductions?
I think that would be a good move to do next. If you've still got any questions, you can chat individually amongst yourselves, or you can ask the presenters a question that there's still opportunity to do so. So when we started,
if I may, jump in real quick. I don't know for sure our presenters, panelists schedules for the night. Some of them may need to jump off and get to other obligations. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them profusely for their time, their thoughtfulness. The level of insight has been invaluable. To have access to this much knowledge in one place has been phenomenal. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom. I think it'll go a long way to helping entrepreneurs and investors build better companies, invest better companies for Washington State. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you, Kai. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kai, for pulling together this fantastic panel and for doing such a great job moderating the questions for everybody. We're delighted to have you, and I understand, panelists, if you feel that you need to leave, please feel free to do so. But if you're able to stay for just 5 or 10 more minutes, I'm going to just run quickly through some slides actually about the state of healthcare that from a couple of different reports that have just come out that might be enlightening for people. And so I'm just going to share my screen here. And here we go. I'm not actually going to go into a full screen mode here, just because I want to make sure that everybody, I don't lose you all. So I just thought it would be helpful if we did the status of health investing. And I guess you can see pictures of you here at the side here. So I'll just move that out of the way. So there are a number of reports. John asked the question about where you go for data. And earlier, Christiana, Susan, Caitlin, Kai, and I were talking about where are some data points. There's the Angel Funders report that has just 2021 was just released yesterday, and there's the State of the Healthcare report, investment and sector trends. And so I just quickly pop through a few slides here. We're going to do it like Ignite. a fast transition. And so the areas of health, digital health, biopharmaceuticals, digital therapeutics, health IT, and mental, we talked about telehealth and medical devices. This is a slide from Dale's organization with regards to what's happening in the space around here. There's 1,100 life sciences organizations located here. That impact report is available for people to review. So if you just look at, if we thought about angel investing, which is what APUS Health Angels is trying to do in terms of increasing angel investing for health sciences, medical, healthcare, health tech, and biotech are actually leading the angel investing. And so that's just confirmation that the space that Christiana, Susan, and Caitlin and Kai are all interested in is actually in leading sectors here. Angels play early stages in the seed round at the very beginning, usually, and then the investments by VCs start to come off. So the individuals at the table here are actually bringing together the early ideas coming forward. The valuations have continued to increase, and they tend to be strongest in the med, health tech, biotech, clean tech area. And that seems to be consistent over the last couple of years, but it does correspond with the comment that someone made earlier. I think it was Susan, about valuations are going crazy. There were 10 new healthcare unicorns born in Q3. And so that means that there's 91 in the healthcare space. If we think about exits, they often exit by IPO, go to the secondary market, or as we were talking earlier about your strategics, you'll see that big component is merger and acquisitions there. And one interesting thing that I like, because there are 3 females on this panel, that female CEOs are closing the funding gap, which has been a concern with regards to whether or not women CEOs are actually achieving funding. And just the optimistic news is that it appears to be closing. So that's just a quick run through of some some statistics to support all of the conversation that we were having. I just thought it might be useful for us to just spend a minute to talk about what the APUS Health Angels program is doing. We're doing investor and company education, and that's one of these sessions. There are a number of them that are happening over the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to start the company investor due diligence. And our key is in connecting new angel investors, seasoned angel investors, and startup entrepreneurs together. In terms of our next couple of educations, on November the 4th, we're going to be talking about intellectual property, leveraging your strategic advantage. And I was asking Dale in a chat whether or not a talk that was given by Intellectual Ventures, Innovex, yesterday would be available, and maybe he can just put that in the chat if it's going to be. On November the 11th, we're going to be talking about business models. And then I just wanted to, for some of the entrepreneurs on the stage, our next events for company timelines are November 18th, we're going to be talking about writing an effective guest profile, which is the way you actually apply into the APUS Health program. December the 1st until midnight is our application date. And we're going to have company pitch practice. And so any investors who are on the call who would like to come back and coach pitch practice on Thursday, December the 16th, here's an invitation for you to come and join us. That's it for me in terms of sharing slides. So I'll quickly turn that off. Now what I'd like to do is, I think we will just open it for some questions if people have them. I'll leave the Zoom room open so you can actually talk. We will excuse people who are feeling that they would like to finish their evening now. Thank you all for joining us. We hope that we'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. And I will post a link on the slides for people who want to have access. I will also tell you that if you really want more data from with regards to the state of the healthcare on November the 2nd, on November the 4th at 2 p.m. There's another session that goes on about that. And here I'm just putting the chat in there. So you can actually go on and register if you want to hear more of that data sets directly. So there you go. For people who are going to be finishing up, to save the chat, you just click the 3 buttons there. Thank you all for joining. Thank you. I see great comments to thank you to the presenters here. And we really want to appreciate your time.
Our pleasure. Thank
Our
you.
pleasure. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.